Hello class, today we are going to start World War I. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to list the four main causes of World War I and assess Germany's culpability or guilt. Germany is often accused of being the one to start this war, so we're going to look at how accurate and fair that assessment is. So, on the eve of World War I, this is what Europe looks like. What does this symbolize? That's right, this symbolizes the complex system of alliances that were entangling the different countries in Europe. So when we look at what we call the powder keg, the Balkan powder keg, we will see that although the thing that sets off this powder keg and actually ignites the war is an assassination, there's a lot of fuel going into this powder keg. There are four main causes of World War I. So the first is militarism, which you will recall means supporting the military to such a degree that the military is basically unquestioned, that there's not really any checks on the military's power. Everybody is eager for war, they glorify the military, and a lot of resources are being put into the military, therefore making it even more likely that a state will opt for a military solution rather than a diplomatic solution to any given problem. Alliances, as we talked about last lesson, and imperialism, because these countries they're growing, they're trying to build empires, they're competing with one another, and they're also used to using violence in the colonies themselves. So again, this doesn't stand out as an exceptional case when you start looking at how they're going to use violence inside Europe. And then lastly, you have nationalism. So as you will see, the four main causes spell out main, M-A-I-N, so that should make it easier for you to remember. And I know you know what nationalism means, the belief that you have not only a group that you belong to based on nationality, but that this group deserves to have a country to itself, for itself, and that it is better than everybody else. So we are going to look at a clip that shows you how nationalistic Europe was on the eve of this war. This clip is taken from a movie called Joyeux Noël, which means Merry Christmas in French. And it's going to show you poems that little kids would be taught. You'll see one in English, in French, and in German. So you will need to read the subtitles.
Enfant, regarde sur ces cartes ce point.
Just want to pause it right here. This piece of territory right here that the French are talking about that's been blacked out, what piece of territory would that have been? Right, that's Alsace-Lorraine, which was taken from the French by the Germans during the Franco-Prussian War. All right.
Alors qu'il faut effacer. De tes petits doigts, tu l'écartes. En rouge, il vaut mieux le tracer. Plus tard, quoi que le sort te fasse, remets-moi bien d'aller là-bas, chercher les enfants de l'Alsace qui nous tendent leurs petits bras. Puisse, en notre chère France, les rameaux verts de l'espérance fleurir par toi, mon cher enfant. Grandis, grandis, la France attend. To rid the map of every trace of Germany and of the Hun, we must exterminate that race. We must not leave a single one. Heed not their children's cries. They're slain now, the woman too, or else someday again they'll rise, which if they're dead, they cannot do.
Ein Feind ist unserer und einer allein. Schon meißelt der Deutschlands Grabestein. Voller Hass ist sein Busen, voller Neid und voll Pein. Ein Feind ist unserer und einer allein. Nun hebt der Freveler die meuchelnde Hand. Sein Name, du kennst sie, ist England.
Okay, so from that clip, we see that even from young ages, different groups of people in Europe are being taught this nationalistic fervor and this hatred of other competing imperialist nations. These are feeding into the Balkan powder keg. And so why is the Balkans, why are they the powder keg where the assassination will take place, which sets off this war? Well, again, the Balkans are down here, okay? This area here, it does include Greece, although most people often don't think of Greece when they think of the Balkans. But Russia wants access to the Mediterranean Sea, and so it would be easier to go through the Balkans. Germany wants to link up with the Ottoman Empire, who they've been helping out, and so this territory here would be useful. So if it belonged to the Austrians in particular, then as allies they would have a clearer shot. And Austria wants to extend its influence and balance out Russia, because Russia's a very large empire and it's continuing to build out towards the east as well. So the spark that lights the powder keg is the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. He's basically the prince of the Austrian Empire, and he and his wife are assassinated while visiting Sarajevo, which is the capital of Bosnia. And so why is he assassinated? Well, they're essentially on kind of a goodwill tour, kind of waving their hands, making nice with the people of Bosnia to extend their influence in the area. And there is a group from Serbia here called the Black Hand. Okay, and so the Black Hand is a nationalist Serbian group. The Serbians had recently broken away from the Ottoman Empire, as had the Bosnians and a bunch of other of those small states in the Balkans. And Serbia wants to basically create, or at least the nationalists in Serbia want to create, a pan-Serbia, a big country just for the Serbs, run by the Serbs. Again, these are nationalists. And there are quite a few Serbs that live in Bosnia. They're very intermixed with Bosnians. There's a mixing of Christians and Muslims. There are some Croatians who live here. And so, but there is a sizable Serbian population that lives in Bosnia. And so in the Serbian nationalist mind, that obviously means that all of this territory should belong to Serbia and everybody else should have to leave. And so the Black Hand plots an assassination against the Austrian Archduke, Franz Ferdinand, the Prince, because they see the Austrians as invaders, as conquerors, as people who are trying to take over their Slavic territory, the Serbian territory, when they are not Slavic. The Austrians are Germanic, and so the nationalists believe they don't belong there. They want to liberate the Bosnians from this Austrian influence and have them rise up, and the Serbs in Bosnia would join the Serbian state and then kick out everybody else who, isn't Serbian. That's the plan. Okay, so they want Bosnia to break away from Austria, join Serbia. This idea of Serbia being just for the Serbians and trying to create a larger Serbia, that is something that's not going to go away. It will be kind of squashed for the next several decades, the Cold War, for example, after World War II. But after the fall of what will be called Yugoslavia, we'll see the Balkans region kind of break up again. They will have united in a country called Yugoslavia under a communist dictator that will keep everybody in line. And then once that falls apart, they will fracture once again, and you will see the Serbs launch a genocide, or what they'll call an ethnic cleansing, trying to cleanse the area of other ethnicities, which is a genocide, against the Bosnians. So that'll happen in the 1990s. But it doesn't come out of nowhere. Like, these seeds, these nationalist ideas have been in the mix. They've been kind of fermenting for generations. So in this case, there's an assassination on the Austrian prince, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Now, was war at this point inevitable? Does Austria have to go to war with Serbia over the actions of this assassin, Gavrila Princip? Well, not necessarily. Austria obviously is going to want the assassin, and Serbia is willing to hand him over. I mean, he was not acting on the orders of the Serbian government, so the Serbian government is happy to hand him over. But Austria further demands that they be allowed to send in troops to Serbia to root out all the members of the Black Hand. Why would they do this? Well, because the Black Hand is at this point a terrorist group. It is an enemy of the Austrian state, and it's just killed one of its leading members of the royal family. But is Serbia going to allow this? Absolutely not. They will agree to give Princip over. They will agree to root out the Black Hand themselves, but they are not going to let Austria in, because what does this amount to? It amounts to an invasion. And Serbia says, absolutely, of course we're not going to let you do that. You've had your eye on us for a long time. You want to take this territory. This is just an excuse for you to do so. So Serbia says no. And this is when we have Austria declare war on Serbia. So that's going to be our first declaration of war. Okay. Now, if you recall from our last lesson, who is Serbia's big brother? That's Russia. So Russia is going to feel the need to come to Serbia's defense, but Russia is not very industrialized and it's not really ready to declare a war. So it's going to stall and it's going to play like it's trying to solve this diplomatically. But while it's doing that, so if this assassination happens in July, it's going to take Russia a little bit to several weeks to get its troops ready, to get them all moved over to the eastern border, right? Because they're all throughout Russia. So the western border. They need to get them over to their western border, ready to invade Austria. So Russia's trying to play like it's the nice diplomat and telling the rest of the world, hey, I'm just trying to make nice between Austria and Serbia while it gets its troops ready. Now Germany, because it shares a border with Russia, sees this happening. And Germany messages Great Britain and says, hey, your ally, Russia, they're getting ready for war. You need to stop them. This could turn into a huge war. But does Great Britain trust Germany? Of course not, because their relationship has soured because of Kaiser Wilhelm II's actions in creating a competitive empire in Africa, no longer buying British goods, etc. So Great Britain doesn't listen. And eventually Russia manages to get its troops set up, and it declares war on Austria. So that's going to be our number 2. Okay. Well, now that Russia's declared war on Austria, who has promised to back Austria up no matter what? That's Germany. So Germany declares war on Russia. That's number 3. Okay. Okay, so now Germany's at war with Russia. Well, who is Russia's ally that promised to back them up no matter what? Right, that's France. However, France is got to get its troops mobilized, and Germany knows this. Germany knows that France is allies with Russia, and if France attacks, if France joins the war, Germany is in trouble because it's going to be fighting a war on 2 fronts, against Russia in the east and against France in the west. So Germany has a plan to knock out France quickly. Okay, so it is going to declare war on France, but it's going to do so by going through Belgium to surprise France and take out Paris really quickly. So that's number 4 and number 5 because it's going through Belgium, right? Belgium is going to fight back against Germany. This is what's called the Schlieffen Plan. So I'm going to write that up here. Schlieffen Plan. The Schlieffen Plan is Germany's plan to go through Belgium, and they're going to take France by surprise. Now, here's the problem. If it goes through Belgium, who is Belgium's big brother that has promised to guarantee Belgium's independence? That's Great Britain. So Great Britain is going to have to declare war on Germany, right? Now, Germany knew this was a possibility. Britain had said, hey, don't declare war on Belgium. Don't mess with them. And Germany does it anyway. Because they think it's in their national interest. But Great Britain gets furious because not only has it made a promise to keep Belgium independent, and so its national honors on the line, but it also feels like Germany is insulting them by not taking their warning seriously. So, and plus, Britain is just as nationalistic as everywhere else and militaristic, so they're pretty eager to join this fight. From Germany's perspective, the Schlieffen Plan is worth this gamble, because if Germany can knock out France, take Paris, and knock out France, it will only have to fight on really one front. And it really doesn't think Britain's going to go to war over Belgium. Who's going to go to war over Belgium? Belgium's a little country. It's not worth losing all these soldiers over, but Germany miscalculates. The Schlieffen Plan was a very impressive plan that came very close to working. The idea was that the Germans would launch a surprise attack through Belgium, and in a highly coordinated effort, which, remember, the Germans have the Prussian army, because Prussia is now part of Germany, and they're very, very well trained and well coordinated, that they should be able to knock out France. But what happens is, back in the German headquarters, they decide to alter the plan at the last minute. They pull some of the troops that were supposed to be over here and fighting in Belgium back to fight the Russians, and as a result, It weakens the troops over here on the Western Front, and it slows them down enough that, and you have some generals that aren't cooperating with one another the way they're supposed to, so it slows them down just enough that the French are able to mobilize and get their troops where they need to be and fight back. And so now Germany winds up with a war on two fronts, which it would have had anyway, but now it's also drawn Great Britain into the war. So it doesn't work out. It comes close, but it doesn't. So again, we said, hey, World War I, one of the lessons that's going to teach us is that things don't typically go to plan. This is one example, right? But if we look at our map, Germany, as I said, often gets blamed for this war. So I want you to think, looking at this map, is this war all Germany's fault? I mean, yes, they invaded Belgium, which drew Great Britain into the war. But Britain was eager to join the war. It didn't necessarily have to. Russia didn't have to join the war. They could have tried to negotiate something between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. Germany wasn't the first or even the second country to declare war. It's the third. So to place the entirety of the blame on Germany in this condition seems a bit unfair. And the Germans are going to be pretty upset at the end of the war when they're supposed to take all of the blame. Now, the Franco-Prussian War as a cause for this, Wilhelm II's actions as a cause for this, if you go back far enough, Germany's actions certainly do play into this in a big way. But again, other countries were eager to prove how awesome they were. So placing the entirety of the blame on Germany, which is still the way a lot of people in America and in Europe think of this war, is pretty unfair, and it's going to have a lot of consequences. It's going to be one of the things that helps lead us to World War II, is the way World War I ends, okay, with Germany having to take this blame. All right, so Europe at war. In August of 1914, when the war starts, this is what Europe looks like. By 1915, this is where we are. We've got the Triple Entente, the Allied powers in tan, and we've got the Central powers in pink, and then all the blue countries are neutral, right? So the belligerents in World War I, a belligerent is a group that's, or a person that is fighting in a conflict. So we've got the Entente or Allied powers, same thing. Entente is the French word. France, Russia, and Great Britain are the big ones. Serbia, of course, is where this all started. And Italy is going to join the Entente powers by 1915. Remember, it had been on Germany's side, but it never really intended to have to fight on Germany's side. So France will wind up promising Italy some territory that it wants from Austria-Hungary if they join on the Allied powers, so Italy will trade sides. They'll wind up doing the same thing halfway through World War II. And then the United States will eventually join, but not until 1917, so we won't talk about the U.S. for a little bit. This isn't much of the United States' war. They're hardly in it. They're important, but they're not in it for very long. And then on the Central Power side, you've got Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Yet, if you look at these countries, again, these are all pretty much European countries. Ottoman Empire is in the Middle East, and the United States will eventually join, but how is this a world war? Well, it's a world war because these places all have colonies, and when an empire goes to war, when a parent country goes to war, its colonies are fair game, right? So if France goes to war in blue here, all of this blue territory is up for grabs. It can be attacked by the countries it's at war with, and it can also be mobilized. The resources, the troops, there will be millions of troops from Africa, from India, from Southeast Asia that will be forced into fighting because their parent country is at war. And they will be doing quite a lot, and they will get very little credit. For example, English soldiers that are killed fighting against the Germans down here in Tanzania, British soldiers, English white British soldiers will get burials, but the African soldiers that are fought and that fight and die in those battles will not get proper individual grave markings. They'll be buried in mass graves with only like a plaque to say, hey, some people died for the British flag here. So they will be largely forgotten up until very recently. Again, that's in keeping with this nationalist, racist ideology from the time period. It's unfortunately not surprising. So let's look at the style of warfare for World War I. World War I is known as the war with the trenches, essentially. So in this section, we're going to look at life in the trenches and why trench warfare was used in World War I. Again, this was supposed to be a glorious little war, short-lived, home within 6 months, back by Christmas, right? But the style of warfare here is trench warfare. So these are trenches. You're literally digging ditches into the earth. that you're going to use for cover. This is not the way most style of warfare was up until this point. These trench warfares, it was used in the Civil War in the United States. That was the first war we see this in. But the Europeans aren't really paying attention to the U.S. Civil War. They're used to very quick wars where you take new technology like machine guns against people who don't have that technology in Africa or in India or in East Asia. And so they're not used to fighting machine gun to machine gun. They're used to lining their troops up across a field and having them march across the field, shooting at each other, much the way things were done in the 1600s, 1400s, etc. So we're going to look at why trenches. And I'm going to show you a video clip here from a movie called War Horse. And while you watch this, you just need to ask yourself, why are they developing trenches? So here we have the cavalry. Cavalry was a massive advantage. Hugely honorable military position, riding on horses. And these are the English military. They're the cavalry. They're going to be attacking a German encampment at the beginning of this war.
Good luck, my friends. On, walk! 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 On, after! After! Walk!
Okay, so as you can see, why trenches? Well, because the trench warfare is necessary in the face of machine guns. This is new technology, and you really can't march soldiers or horses in front of machine guns, although they will learn that the hard way. So when you start digging in, okay, it's not going to be a quick war. It lasts 4 years, the same amount of time as the U.S. Civil War. And so you can see here on the Western Front, there's not a whole lot of movement. Once you dig these trenches in, you pretty much sit there for 4 years, fighting over maybe 30 feet of territory. When the Schlieffen Plan fails, Germany moves a lot of its troops to the east. They put enough troops on the western border to hold their ground against the French. The French are better trained, so it's going to be harder for them to make any advances, whereas the Russians are much less well trained. They're less well armed. The Russians are under-industrialized, so they don't have enough guns for all their troops. They would give one gun for each two troops, for each pair, and then tell the guy who's holding the bullets, hey, if the guy who has the gun dies, pick up the gun and keep fighting. So here you're going to see a bit more movement. The Germans are able to push the Russians back more. But overall, a lot of this warfare is fought along the same kind of lines for 4 years. Trenches were complex series of interconnected ditches, basically. So you have your front line and then the enemy's front line. In between them, it's called no man's land. And then you've got fallback trenches, support trenches, reserve trenches, and then communications trenches that connect these. And so you'd have your heavy artillery farther back. That's like things that are launching like bombs, for example, across, heavy artillery across to the enemy trenches. Reserve trenches is where you go to get a break, but you might be on the front line for a week at a time, and then support trenches and then reserve trenches behind them. No man's land is, I mean, you can see it's just desolate. It doesn't belong to either side, which is why it's called no man's land, but it is, it's just a wasteland, right, of craters from bombs and mortars and dead bodies that have been attacking, that have been killed while they're trying to attack one trench or the other. Going over the top was the term for leaving your trench and running towards the enemy trench to try and take their trench. This is a propaganda poster trying to show soldiers what it would be like going over the top. You can see it looks very happy and sunny and glorious. This is more of a reality going over the top. You can see much dirtier, much more dangerous, much less glorious, chaotic. You're taking your life into your hands, or at least the government has taken it into their hands and told you to go. Soldiers were supposed to keep their equipment on them at all times and keep it in good condition, but very clearly, very quickly, over the course of the first few weeks, it's impossible. You're living in a dirt hole. So keeping yourself clean and with good hygiene and proper care for your equipment is impossible, right? Some trenches were extremely narrow. You might have an up and a down trench, so you can only move in one direction because only one person can fit through at a time. Other trenches might be reinforced with wooden support beams. It just kind of depends on how many people are there, how long they've been there, right? Here you can see a guy's lying down, taking a nap. Somebody else is on duty, taking a nap, taking a nap, or possibly passed away. Life in the trenches is boring and terrifying at the same time because you are constantly on edge. Anytime shelling could start, the enemy could attack. You could be ordered to attack. But at the same time, in between those attacks, in between the shelling, you are just sitting there in a dirt hole. So you're reading newspapers, you're looking at pictures of the people you left behind, you're playing card games. You could be sitting here listening to people who've been injured in no man's land. You can't go get them because you will be shot and killed. But you're listening to them moan and die and scream out for help, but you can't go help them. So that is going to take a massive psychological toll. These are your friends, your buddies. And it's going to be really, really hard for these veterans who do survive to come home and adjust back to life as a civilian, right? In the trenches, it's not just you living there, right? You've also got rats for company. So life in the trenches, it's extremely wet in the spring. It's cold in the winter. It's freezing in the winter. It's super hot in the summer. And you're living with rats that are going to be nibbling on your food supplies. They're also going to grow to be unusually large, the size of small rabbits or badgers, because they can also be eating corpses. And your hygiene is going to be pretty bad. Trench foot is what happens when your feet are constantly wet because of you're living in a mud hole, and your capillaries are not meant to be constantly wet. You're not a frog. So they will break down, which means they cannot transport oxygen and take away cellular waste. And so your foot, the tissue starts to die. And it turns what we call necrotic. It's dead tissue. And if you don't get that taken care of, generally by amputation, it can infect your blood and you can get gangrene and you can die from trench foot. So we're going to stop there for today with that lovely image. And next time we'll look at some battles and some technology.